after heavily me talking about Toy Story 3. But
oh, goody.
Are we all good? Is audio good? Can we see everyone?
I think we're okay.
Is no one dropping frames at 300 minutes per second?
I think we're
good.
That
doesn't make sense, John.
It doesn't. I just made it up off the top of my head because I'm just pulling things out of our ass is kind of in the theme of the show.
I'm good. I got my grapes. I got my water in a mug. I got my animal crackers.
I got my discount Turner's tea.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about Turner's tea.
I miss it, man. I miss it. But I'll make do with It Takes Two to Mango tea.
It takes two to mango. All right. Are we ready to rock and roll?
Well, I don't have any rocks, and I can't really roll on camera, but regardless, figuratively, yes.
All right. Figuratively rocking and rolling. Welcome back to the Hack Fraud Show. This is... How many of these episodes have I started by saying that phrase and then laughing while saying the word Most of them, probably.
I don't know.
Probably most of them.
We're gonna have to get Nate to go back and do a count.
I don't even know if Nate listens to this thing anymore. Nate, if you're still out there, thank you.
We do this like every 5 episodes, and we like make sure Nate's still out there, and like you'll hear from him when you go to the movies. Like, yeah, I listen.
Yeah, okay. This week it's Jacques Tati week. We're venturing into France to continue our ever-growing international film series.
And we also watched a bunch of things that we're going to have some passionate conversations about.
Oh boy, are we ever. I technically watched 3 movies today because I watched Mon Oncle this morning and then I watched 2 more while I was waiting to record this thing. Yeah,
you got me beat.
My 4th roommate is back in town, and that means movie marathons are going to start happening out the wazoo because that's the way we roll.
Interesting. Yeah, you will always destroy us when it comes to what you've been watching. that's just what I've come to accept with this.
All right. Well, let's get started. Before, as you know, before we get into Jacques Tati here, what am I even doing? Let's just go into it. What have we been watching?
What have we been watching? Well, I kind of want to get this off my chest. Toy Story 3. This is, I think, out of like all the movies I've claimed I haven't watched, this is the one that got the most shocked response out of y'all, and I know why, because like the Toy Story franchise is very dear to honestly all our hearts. I think we all like binge watch these things to the point where we destroyed the VHS tape.
Yeah, pretty much.
But for some inexplicable reason, I never saw 3.
I can't believe that.
I can't even really recall the thought process. I think it was just like I was just at the point where like I don't know to be honestly anymore. Like there was no good reason why I didn't see it.
I was almost 13 years old when Toy Story 3 came out, and I was more excited about that movie than I'd been for any movie in years.
But regardless, I saw it. The movie is...
We're off to a great start here.
I'm trying to articulate something here because it's kind of strange experience to watch because I haven't seen the last 2 Toy Story movies in a while. So at first it's kind of we're back, guys. Like it starts with the same sort of fantasy, quasi video games nonsense stuff from Toy Story 2.
Yeah.
They're like in like PlayTime heist, then it cuts to like VHS footage of like Andy playing with all his toys.
So I assume then you missed the brilliant callback to the original in that sequence where it's
what was it again?
Well, it's literally like some of the same dialogue, like the whole thing with like I brought my attack dog with a built-in force field, while I brought my dinosaur who eats force field dogs. It's just a...
No, I missed that. Oh, clever that.
Yeah.
Clever that. And then we go into Andy's now, I think they say 17, and he's going to college, and none of all the toys are trapped in a chest, and they try desperate maneuvers to try and get played with again.
Yeah.
And they're wrestling with like being thrown away. I think this movie might have one of the darkest premise of a kid's movie I've ever seen. Of like, people are gone, we've lost people, they've been thrown away, and now we just got to move forward.
It's almost like they're like veterans of some war, and they've like
that's how Woody talks to them. It's like, well, we've lost some people along the way. Bo Peep.
Yeah.
Yes, Bo Peep. But then, and one thing I'm noticing this, and this is something I'm pretty sure is in all the others, which is like a wacky series of like hijink coincidences that set the plot in motion.
Yeah, that's kind
of a thing for this series, and I don't know if that's a good or bad thing or not. But so there's a whole mishap where like Andy wants to take just Woody to college, and he puts all of the others in a trash bag and put up in the attic. But oh no, mishaps happen. Andy's mom accidentally put him on the side of the road.
I will say this one leans a little more heavily on that like comic kind of misunderstanding than the other two do.
What's happening now? Oh no, now they're going to the daycare.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of that in this movie.
Yeah, the first two aren't really like that. Now that I think about it.
The first two have, like, aspects of that. Like, there's always, like, some core, like, coincidental misunderstanding that sets the plot in motion. But in this, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
But then we get to the daycare, which is a totalitarian regime run by a bear. Run by a nihilistic bear who says there is no God.
John,
what?
You can't tell me that's not your favorite part of the whole.
Look, there's a weird sort of like, the toys have an almost religious devotion to Andy, and it almost plays off as objectivism versus monarchical servitude. I am not going to lie, that subtext is here, and I will defend that.
Okay.
But, okay, What's next then? Okay, the issue I have with the bear is that like he has the exact same backstory as Jesse, except he's just evil. And like I don't know.
It's not the exact same backstory.
What?
It's not the exact same backstory.
He gets abandoned and la-di-la-di-la ends up
It wasn't to a sad montage, okay?
That's how you know he's the villain. It's not to a sad montage.
Yeah, it's to a like noirish montage narrated by Bud Lucky as Clown.
Clown's great, by the way.
There's so many great like little touches like that in this movie. Like the clown, the freaking like telephone that like with the like Brooklyn voice that talks to Woody.
That is so fucking funny. I love that so much. And then they ripped off like the sticker he had for a mouth, and they just said, "They broke me." There was a lot of like standard heist movie material made hilarious by the fact that they're all toys.
Yeah.
I will say that like this movie has a goddamn bringer of a climax where like they make this entire like breakout plan, and the daycare as like this makeshift prison is actually really fascinating and really fun. But then shenanigans happen. But then there's more shenanigans, betrayals. They end up in the trash, and then they're almost incinerated.
Yep.
In a scene that's supposed to make me cry, but I know they're all going to live.
I don't know, man. When I saw that the first time, I was sitting there going like, whoa, like, are they going to do this? Like, what?
There is like the whole, like, them all holding hands and looking into the fire.
That's beautiful. I mean, come on.
It's not, well, the issue is then the worst Deus Ex Machina that's ever been in these movies happens.
I like it. The claw saves them all.
And then the ending happens, which is probably why this movie is loved as much as it is. This ending is perfect.
Sure. Yeah.
You could not make a better ending to the series where, like, there's this sort of, it's awfully bittersweet because you just get this, like, these moments of, like, Andy, like, recollecting his childhood.
Yeah.
Through these things, and also the toys must move on. They must, like, say, like, this is the end of the road for us. We have to find a new owner or we're all practically dead.
Yeah.
And there's I think the best shot in this movie, and it's the closest the movie got me to crying. It's the shot where there's this pullback shot of the toys are in the foreground, and you see Andy just driving off in the far background.
Yeah,
just a brilliant shot, brilliant summation of the whole movie. So I didn't mean to summarize all of it, but I think I did.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
That's pretty much it. I think my issues with it stem from the fact that I think just a lot of the pieces in this movie were done better in Toy Story 2.
There are aspects of it.
Yeah. There are less contrivances in Toy Story 2. I think the climax is just a little bit better put together in Toy Story 2.
Well, I mean, you don't have to sell me on this. Toy Story 2 is my favorite of the movies, and I also think it's the best Pixar movie.
Watching this, I now realize that more fully.
I still think Toy Story 3 is, brilliant. I mean, it does repeat, quite a bit, maybe, more than I, kind of realized at the time. But I don't know, that, whole, breakout of the daycare sequence...
Brilliant. I'm not gonna... It's brilliant.
There's nothing like that. I'm not gonna deny that. There's nothing else like that in Pixar's filmography, I think. And, I mean, they do kind of... Yeah, the villain in both Toy Story 2 and 3 is, a weird, a toy who, hates kids for some reason.
Yeah, a toy who hates kids and is all nihilistic because somebody abandoned them, la-di-la-di-la.
I do,
and so forth, and I just don't think he's very interesting. Though the totalitarian state of the daycare is fascinating. It makes no goddamn sense, but it's fascinating.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I can see where you're coming from, but you can't deny, this is the perfect,
It's the perfect ending
to
the series. I remember people were saying, oh, the ending made me cry, and I'm like, okay, movie, bring it on, let's see this, and goddamn, it almost did it.
Yeah,
it almost made me cry.
My favorite little thing in there is there's a bit where, Bonnie, waves Woody's arm to, wave goodbye to Andy, and Andy kind of, hesitates for a second, and I love that. That whole sequence is just beautifully done.
Yeah, this movie also has by far the best animation the series has ever had.
That is true, although I will say... I rewatched Toy Story 2 this past week. I mean, I don't need to go too into detail about that. I just think it's a perfect movie. But that animation, I think, is weirdly, really, really good.
It's the most creative they ever got. I think Toy Story 2 has the best set pieces. Toy Story 2 has the best scenarios.
Also, a lot of it...
The airport stuff is some of the best things, is one of the best things in a Pixar movie.
I love that. It's so strange to see, just how much of an uptick in scale there was, from the first one to the second one. It's exponential.
Well, the first Toy Story, they weren't sure it was going to do well. It was a big risk.
Yeah.
So, I felt once they got their hands on more toys, ha ha ha, joke, in Toy Story 2.
Yeah.
And were able to just, to do bigger and grander things. Whereas, Toy Story 1 is, there's, the big, climax at the end where we're not aiming for the truck and they're all flying and so forth.
Yeah.
But, it's a mostly small movie dedicated to two people's suburban homes and a pizza planet.
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know.
Regardless. Fascinating series, this.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry you didn't I mean, it sounds like you liked a lot of Toy Story 3.
I really liked it. I love the ending. I think I think the movie's worth it just for the resolution it gives on the series.
Okay.
I'll give it that. I just think that a lot of the same pieces were done better in Toy Story 2.
Yeah. I'm not going to fight you on that.
I think it recycles just a little bit too much.
I'm not going to fight you on that. But I still think it's great.
Well, I saw, the concern of, I was texting you, my, pseudo-academic musings on it, and you're saying, are you going to hate on Toy Story 3?
Are you gonna be Armand White? Are you gonna be the second coming of Armand White? Jeez.
I would never have a bullshit reason like Armand White had.
Consumerism.
Let's see. Other than that, what have I been... Oh, yeah, Atomic Blonde.
Oh, yeah!
Atomic Blonde. You seemed kind of shocked that I liked it.
You were like, I really liked it. And I was like, oh, okay. 'Cause I was just a lot more muted, in my reaction to it.
I mean, I'm not going to say, I can't see where you're coming from. Do I remember any of the characters' names? Fuck no. it's a movie that's, like, held up by, like, they give you just, like, a minimal amount of character, and it's left to the actors to fill in the blanks.
Yeah.
And I think, like, combined with the backdrop, I think that's just enough for me. Because, like, all the fascinating things are in the backdrop. Whereas, like, it's a spy movie, not, like, set in the throes of it, where it's all black and white. It's set in a world where, like, everything's breaking down, and there's, like, this terrible anxiety of the future. And, like, you have, like, the scared French spy saying, I've never seen Berlin like this. I did this just for the thrill of it. This is fucking scary. And I think the backdrop is really what makes this movie, and also the oneer they have near the end is one of the most brilliant fight scenes I think I've seen all year. As, like, what better metaphor for the end of the Cold War than a fight where everyone just ends bloodied and exhausted? The issue is that there are two endings to this movie, and only one of them's good and necessary.
Yeah, no, the backdrop and, like, the frippery of this movie is great. It's very stylishly made. I love the look of it.
I adore how it looks.
Yeah, the story construction of it is so ludicrous and after a certain point stupid that I was just kind of not super engaged with it.
I know. Well, it's a style over substance movie. I have no qualms about saying that. It is a like pretty stripped down spy action film held up by like really good filmmaking and a really nice backdrop. And like the movie has like this really great ending of where like we have like people are saying like, all right, you're on leave, we're going to start the 90s. Well, this sort of like, okay, what's the future? We don't know. Everything's up in the air.
Yes, and then
like, you have the great.
And London Calling starts playing, like the movie's gonna be over.
Yeah, and like you have this great shot of Charlize Theron smoking a cigarette, feet up on the desk. But then, cut to Paris. We're fighting KGB baddies again, and we pay off that cocksucker line earlier in the movie, and then it ends.
Horrible.
Yeah, it's so unnecessary. I don't know why that's there.
That I maybe at least part of the reason why I reacted the way I did to this movie is because that ending left a really sour taste in my mouth.
That ending's pointless. Like they should just cut it at London Calling and call it a day. I have no idea why they decided to keep it going. What can I say about this movie other than it's kind of right up my alley? It's a kind of political thriller about the end of the Cold War with some beautiful, sometimes breathtaking filmmaking. And I love Berlin, so what can I say?
All right, well, I'm glad you liked it more than I did.
What can I say? I think it's really interesting. It's good. And the soundtrack's great. The soundtrack sticks with you.
Soundtrack is great. I love it.
I kind of put it in the same boat that I did The Man from Uncle last year. It was a sort of like
well, that was 2 years ago, my man.
Oh yeah, you're right. Fuck me. But like sort of both of them are kind of like these kind of B-level spy thrillers really held up high by really great backdrops and really great filmmaking. So
between you and Vidiots, I've heard like several like kind of more than half-hearted endorsements of The Man from Uncle, so I may watch it at some point.
I think it's fun. I mean, you're not going to find anything groundbreaking in there, but if you just want to see like a man Guy Ritchie go berserk kind of spy thriller with some charismatic actors, it's pretty fun.
All right.
That's what I've been watching.
Reed, what have you seen lately?
To quote CinemaSins, skip.
Alrighty then. Well, I guess I can talk now about what I've been watching. All right.
How many things have you watched this week?
Oh, several. Actually, one of them was just a holdover from last week that I forgot to talk about. But Let's see. We covered Toy Story 2, so I don't need to talk about that. Actually, I'll start with this. As you may know, if you've been following the recent episodes of the show, I've been working my way through HBO's The Wire.
Oh, yes, you have.
And this week, I finished. I mean, it's a spectacular show. It's incredible. It's a phenomenal just achievement of sustained narrative television. I will say this about the fifth season. The fifth season is a little strange. And listen, season 4 of The Wire is one of the best things ever produced. Like, so coming off of that, anything I think would be a little bit of a letdown. But season 5 is weird. I think it's because they had most of all the other seasons of The Wire are either 12 or 13 episodes. Season 5 is 10 episodes. So
so there kind of feels like there's something cut off.
There's not so much that. It just feels like the arc of season 5 is a little like less believable than some of the other seasons. Not to say it's unbelievable, and it's also weird because in season 3, the whole thing of season 3 is literally there's like a lieutenant on the police force who decides to legalize drugs in his district. So what happens in season 5 isn't really any crazier than that. It's just that I think because of the reduced episode order, it feels like they had less time and space to tell the story than they maybe should have had.
You just feel the framing is weaker.
Yeah, well, because here's what happens. McNulty, who's kind of not like the focal point, but kind of the anchor point like of the show for most of it, so what happens, like, you start season 5, like, the budget for the police department is, like, immediately slashed. Like, it's cut way back by the mayor because he has to deal with, like, school, like, budget issues. So the budget for the police department is slashed. Nobody can work overtime anymore. They shut down the major crimes unit, which is where, like, all our favorite characters are working. So McNulty goes back to homicide and is so frustrated. He's fed up with the bureaucracy. All this is totally fits with McNulty's character, what he's been established. What McNulty does is he decides to fake a serial killer who is killing homeless people in Baltimore. Now, I believe
extreme.
Okay, they do set it up like pretty well. They set it up like to a point where you would believe it, and I do think it makes sense like for McNulty's character to do it. I just don't think they give it quite the time it needed for him to like get fed up enough to like go to this point. Like it happened at the end of episode 2, he's like, I'm gonna fake a serial killer, and you're like, okay. Like if this were in like episode 3 or episode 4, like maybe that would have been a little bit better. Like
I just need one more montage of bureaucracy him up.
Yeah, I mean, well, The Wire isn't really a montage kind of show, but except at the end. But no, so like it's not that I don't buy the whole scenario. It's just that I think they needed a little bit more time to develop it a bit more fully. That said, it does work. Season 5 is still like a great season of television. They really show their gift for just establishing like environments like right off the bat. Like the Baltimore Sun newsroom feels like just totally lived in and as great an environment as anything else we've seen on the show.
What little I've seen of the show, the world building is always cool.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And then the ending I like, and there's a lot of great stuff they do in the series finale. And I do think a lot of like too much pressure is put on endings just by our modern kind of pop culture landscape.
Yeah, we're like, the ending needs to be the be-all, end-all. It's a great show we've seen.
And it's also weird just because, like, each season of The Wire feels like its own, like, self-contained story to a certain extent. So each one is, like, kind of... the end of each season, like, brings its, like, season narrative to a close in a really compelling way. The finale... My one quibble, like, with the finale of the whole show is that it seems to go out of its way, like, a little too much to really hammer home the point of, like, you know, history repeating itself in loops and whatnot. Like, younger characters, pretty much all the younger characters, like, seem to follow some path that an older character had before. And that, to me, it seems like that felt just a little bit too forced.
That's just a bit too neat for this kind of show.
Yeah, and I won't say the ending is neat because there are a lot of like loose ends that they leave dangling, and it's not like a perfect like everybody's happy, everything's all wrapped up in a nice little bow. Not by any means, but maybe they go just a little too far in that direction.
Okay,
but that's that.
Okay, yeah, this show does sound fascinating. The issue is it warrants a patience that my ADHD-riddled mind may not be capable of.
Yeah, I'm not sure you would necessarily be captivated by this show, but I don't know. I love it. It's great. I hopefully in the future I can speed through more prestige dramas like I did this one. So that's great. Let's see.
It sounds fascinating.
All right, I'm going to try and speed through some of these a little bit. Let's see. I saw Baby Driver again. I forgot to mention that last week. Totally fine, like, fun summer movie.
It's a fun little movie that's 30 minutes too long.
Yeah, I agree with that.
That's about all there is.
It's whatever. Edgar Wright's other movies are better, but, what can you do? On the plane ride back to LA, I rewatched Casino Royale.
Ooh.
Good movie. Like, really good, solid movie. Daniel Craig is great in it, of course. I think this movie will be remembered forever for, like, what it brought to the Bond series and the way it, like, redefined the character. That's all those aspects of it are great. This movie has the weirdest pacing. It is an hour before his love interest even shows up in the movie. It is literally an hour before Ava Green shows up in this movie, playing the lead, like, female character.
Sacrilege!
It's not sacrilege, it's so strange. Like, and that's also, like, the point where, like, the real, like, plot thrust of the movie kicks in, and
everything else is just Bond's new.
It's just so strange. And then there's also, like, that extra act, like, tacked on at the end, which I don't want to say should have been cut, because it feels like it fits, and I like the whole thing with, like, Bond falls in love, and, like, he wants to quit MI6, and, like, all that stuff. I like that, and it deepens the character, and I don't know. This movie just has the weirdest pacing, and it's definitely too long, and I don't know. It is a strange beast, this movie.
Well, I mean, I will say two things. One, at least it's not Quantum of Solace.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
And two, I suppose this was, to me, this was really the ball-crushing moment of the Bond series, especially having.
Oof.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen Casino Royale in full.
Oh, interesting.
Oh.
Well, you should watch it.
I think I've only, like, seen it, like, intermittently, and, like, I think I've only seen it, like, in the background, and, like, the only thing I had to say about it is, God, this movie seems just to go on forever.
It really does at times, and there are a lot of parts of it that I really like. Like, all the stuff with the poker game I think is great. Mads Mikkelsen is a fantastic villain. The way it's shot is so interesting because it's got, like, a gritty, like, feel to it, but it's still, parts of it are, like, done in, like, a weird, like, exaggerated kind of way. Like, this is Martin Campbell, who also directed, like, GoldenEye. So it's not quite to the point of, like, the kind of stripped down Roger Deakins look that Skyfall has. So that's a little weird.
Interesting.
I don't know. This is an interesting movie. Parts of it work, parts of it don't. I mean, Daniel Craig's Bond will be remembered forever. And
it's a turning point.
It is a turning point for sure. Also, I think this movie, like, would probably, like, be better for me if Quantum of Solace had not been just a fucking shithole. Like, this movie, like, this movie ends on a cliffhanger, and you're like, oh my god, what's gonna happen next? And what happens next is Quantum of Solace, and it's just terrible.
Isn't that movie that bad?
It is awful. It is no lie for me to say, like, Quantum of Solace is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. Like, I hate it so much.
Wow.
Maybe it's not that bad, but, like, honest to God, like, oh my, I don't want to watch it again to find out.
Wow. But, well, Tyler, let's go down the list. What else is there?
Okay, I'll just run these down because I watched these today. I saw Christopher Guest's Best in Show, the dog show mockumentary.
Oh.
It's good. It's a fun little movie. I enjoy Christopher Guest's mockumentaries. Very, very funny. I like it a lot. I finally watched Some Like It Hot, which I had never seen in full until today, as it turns out.
What'd you think?
It's a good movie. It's fun. It's a little long. Like, it definitely feels long. It's only 2 hours, but I don't know. It just, like, it moves really fast, but, like, I don't know, somehow it just feels like, I don't know, maybe the pacing of that movie is also a little strange. I don't know. It's great. It's got a super tight screenplay. I mean, Billy Wilder, like, what else can you expect? Jack Lemmon's great. Tony Curtis is great. Marilyn Monroe is Marilyn Monroe. That's all good stuff.
When you get what it says on the tin.
Yeah. So that's great. And then I also ventured to my local multiplex to see The Hitman's Bodyguard.
Well, when you said you watched it, I just thought, like, wait a minute, Logan Lucky was playing and you saw this?
This was not my idea. Well, because my roommate moved back in yesterday, and he and his dad were here, and, you know, they invited us to go out, and they wanted to see The Hitman's Bodyguard, so I was like, yeah, okay, the trailers were fun. The reviews have not been very good, but maybe I'll get some good laughs out of it.
Yeah.
And there are a few good laughs. There's a few good scenes. This movie's bad.
It's a modern comedy. You didn't need to say much.
And, like, whoever cut the trailers for this movie, like, did a really good job, because the trailers were very entertaining. This movie's just... Apparently, it was, like, written as, like, a straightforward, like, action drama. And then they basically, like, reworked it to be a comedy in, like, 2 weeks. And, oh boy, does that ever show.
Oh boy.
I
love retrofitting scripts in under 2 weeks.
Listen, Ryan Reynolds and Samuel L. Jackson have, like, pretty good chemistry. There is no reason this movie had to have a plot. Like, all you needed for this movie was, like, Samuel L. Jackson and Ryan Reynolds, like, have to go across the country for some bullshit reason and just have to bounce off each other. That's all you need. That's all you need.
That's what the trailers looked like, some, like, wild caravan trip of Ryan Reynolds and Samuel L. Jackson run through Amsterdam.
Yeah, no. This movie has an elaborate, so generic plot that has not been advertised at all. Gary Oldman, who these days cannot seem to get into a good movie to save his life. He plays, like, the president of Belarus who's been, like, committing human rights violations and goes on trial at The Hague. The whole deal is, like, Ryan Reynolds has to get Samuel L. Jackson to The Hague to testify against Gary Oldman. And...
Well, I never thought I'd hear of a mainstream Hollywood movie having the dictatorial president of Belarus.
It's so like bad. It's so horrible. The plot is so generic. 85% of this movie looks like it was shot in front of a green screen. It's
wow.
I was bored and also, like, the action is, like, not funny at all. And the whole point of an action comedy is to have the action provide the comedy, and this movie
that's what's paid to do.
The action and the comedy parts are, like, totally separate, and neither one works very well.
Oh, cool action scene joke.
And there's a twist that should not have been a twist. It's bad. It's bad. There's not enough, like, fun. I mean, there are a couple fun parts, but, like, not nearly enough to recommend this movie to anyone. It's just bad. It's just bad.
Speaking of Gary Oldman, he can't do a Winston Churchill impersonation to save his goddamn life.
Boy, that movie looks horrible.
Oh my god. I've heard that speech so many times, and I've never heard it said less convincingly.
You know, that speech sounded better in Dunkirk, and it wasn't even performed by Churchill. It was performed by some guy.
No, Reed, you're right. That is like John Oliver's joke colonial Britain voice. And you see, we have the diamond, and you don't. So hip hip cheerio, fuck off.
Oh no, I was thinking of the one that's like, coconut brains, but I assume it's coconut. We shall soon find out. Wacky stick.
Can we talk about Jacques Tati now?
Is that all the movies you saw?
That's all I've got for you today.
Well, we saw 2 French films. I had the idea of speaking this bit in French, but I just confuse you people, so...
Oh, I should probably give you a fair warning. My subtitles, when I was viewing Mon Oncle, crapped out.
I had that too.
Was this on Canopy? Yeah, I think it's just a bad subtitle. It actually doesn't matter all that much because
yeah.
Just because how Jacques Tati's builds his films.
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you're gonna have the subtitles crap out on a foreign film, like a Jacques Tati movie is like the best one to have it happen.
Yeah, I think that's like why his work travels well, and like I imagine like there's a bunch of like people who imagine French film is all Jacques Tati land. Because like it's like all like very very broad exaggerations. It's all like almost silent slapstick comedy.
Yeah.
Like there is in Mon Oncle, there is a city that looks like it's right out of like a French 1 lesson on street names and like.
All right, so a little bit of a preface here. So Jacques Tati, he only made like a handful of movies, but he, I guess, came from kind of like a vaudeville background, I guess. And his movies are basically, to quote George Miller, like silent films with sound.
That's pretty accurate.
And
they're all like modernist. They're all modernist versions of Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times.
Yeah, they're like weird like musings on like modernist French society. Several of them star, actually both the ones we watched, star Tati himself as Monsieur Hulot, a kind of bumbling French comedic figure. So, where do we want to start with these two movies?
Where would y'all like to start? I can start on either one.
Let's start with Mon Oncle.
Yeah, let's do that.
Mon Oncle, okay, so this is a film about, like, I mean, technically the star is Monsieur Hulot and his little I can't survive in modern France stick. But, like, the real meat of it is, like, this ultra, like, consumerist family with this ultra-modern house.
Yeah.
And a stupid fish fountain that cracks out about 60% of the way through the movie.
Which is great. I love that fountain.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so in this movie, Monsieur Hulot interacts with his super modern, consumerist relatives.
Yeah. All about, I have like the best car, I have like the best house, I have this giant fish fountain that I only turn on for my impressive guests.
Yes, which I love. I love that.
Yeah.
And also furniture that isn't made to be sat on.
like it's all like the kind of like functionless furniture that's all like, oh, look at this piece. Yes, that is a couch. You can sit on it. That's what it was made for.
I love that. I mean, these movies are basically plotless. They function mainly as like a series of ever-escalating sight gags.
Pretty much.
Punctuated with sound effects. This movie, there are a lot of, and, you know, by function of that, I think, you know, with these movies, you kind of reach the point where you're like, okay, some parts of this movie are going to work for you and some parts aren't.
Yeah, I guess, like, it's going to be strange that, like, a lot of the same points I'm going to make in this episode are kind of similar to the points I was making about Rainer Werner Fassbinder last week.
Okay.
Whereas that, like, these movies are, like, have a single layer. A single theme and some variations of it.
Yeah. And
it pretty much sticks with that to the end. There is no character development. Nobody changes. Everyone's kind of an archetype.
Yeah.
There is sort of like, there is satire being made, and it all has the same point of modernist capitalist France is a horror show.
Yeah.
And we need to go back to this lovely little stereotype town that I built full of dogs and bicycles.
Yeah. Although, can you clarify for me what exactly is meant to like be happening at the end of this movie? Like, it seems like Hulot's brother-in-law like ships him off to work in some other factory somewhere.
Yeah,
and then
that's
like
what happens, but then they follow dogs.
And then like
I believe that might be an airport.
Well, I think it's supposed to be an airport. Yeah, I think that's pretty clear. But your guess is as good as mine, man. I don't know. I don't fucking know.
That's the one point where I was kind of like I'm not sure what just happened. Like Hulot like disappears, and then like his brother-in-law like seems to have like a moment of connection with his son. Finally, like they do the thing where they whistle to get someone to run into the lamppost, which I love.
Yes.
I don't know. And I think this is going to be like a recurring thing, like with this and Playtime. Like, there were parts of this movie where I was kind of bored.
Oh yeah, there's some parts where I'm like, I get it.
There are parts that I love though, like that whole like dinner party or garden party sequence is fantastic.
Masterpiece. I love that's like I think I like this more than Playtime just for that part because like there's a lot of like about like just how impersonal and chauvinist that like family life has become.
Yeah.
And how like their boy is something to be showed off, their house is something to be showed off. They have these dinner parties where like nothing works but it all looks impressive.
Yeah.
And they have
everyone's like talking about nonsense.
Yeah, and they have a garage door that they install, but then they can't get out of.
Yeah, like all of it's just like stuff to be showed off, but none of it works.
Yeah. The other big part of this movie that I love is that like the husband like works in like a plastic hose factory, and like Hulot goes to work there at one point and just like it's disastrous, and he like ends up.
It looks like something right out of modern times.
Yeah.
It's like ultimate like stereotype of like a clean, pristine factory, and like it seems that like all the factory workers just get a kick out of how much Hulot cannot work.
Yeah. I love all of that. There's a lot of good stuff in this movie. I think Modern Times is a better version of this story.
The problem is that, like, I guess, like, my big issue, and we're going to get into this with Playtime, too, is that, like, Charlie Chaplin had his big satire of, like, the modern society is too mechanist and without compassion. We must inject compassion into it. We must have compassion for poor people and, like, criminals and all these people. Whereas this film has like the very shallow notion of we just need to get back to all this wonderful architecture and French stereotypes we had before.
Yeah. Charlie Chaplin also understood that like movies had to have an emotional core.
Well, it's not even that like I need this movie to have a plot or like or even characters. Is that like I want more ideas than modern France is bad.
Yeah. Reed, what do you have to say?
So the last time I saw this, I actually didn't see it all the way through. So this was the first time I saw it all the way through. I mean, there were some parts where I'm like, okay, can we just move on? But then, yeah.
Tyler's right. Like some parts work, some parts don't. Like I think to me, my favorite image of the whole movie is when like he uses like the car cigarette lighter to light his pipe, and he just chucks it out the window and matches out.
That's great.
Some parts are like golden pieces of slapstick. Other bits are like, what's the joke here?
Well, no, I get the joke, but the joke's not funny.
Yeah.
That happens too.
Yeah.
So, I think like we it's the sort of thing that actually I'll get to this when we go to Playtime. That idea of like we like the idea of it more than watching it.
Yeah, and you also get this weird point because like Tati like apparently like didn't like close-ups, like he thought they were vulgar or something. So like he never, and you know this is also true of Playtime, he never gets closer than like a medium shot, and that
Which
can
is
also
interesting.
It's interesting. It also gets a little bit like, oh my god, Tati, like tell me where to look. Like you're the director, like direct me, please.
And his frames are just really cluttered to the point that you look everywhere. Like, this is something that happened in Playtime a lot. They're like, I forgot. Oh, wait, Mr. Hulot is right. Monsieur Hulot is right there.
Yeah.
Although, after seeing both this and Playtime, I kind of get the feeling Tati doesn't want us to look at Hulot a lot. He wants us to look at everything else.
Yeah, I think there's something intentional in that. Like, Hulot is just marginalized by everything around him. And that he's just so, like, overwhelmed and just so burned out by, like, everything around him. Yeah. Which I think is, like, that is just the point of the Monsieur Hulot character. The issue is that doesn't always make for, like, very compelling images and, like, a compelling plot.
No, like, well, yeah, that's true.
There's also a kind of, like, strange sort of, like, social conservatism in the movie because I think the French are very defensive about their culture. Like, I think, especially Parisians, like, the Eiffel Tower was seen as an eyesore for years and years and years. They have built one skyscraper in Paris, And the moment they put it up, everyone hated it to the point that they have never allowed another skyscraper to be built in Paris ever again. All the skyscrapers in Paris are in this like little cluster at the end of the Champs-Élysées called La Défense. It is a ghetto of modernism. Like the French are very defensive about that culture, about like their culture, and they see architecture, especially like that old sort of like 19th century Second Empire architecture as part of French culture, and there's a lot of that in this movie.
That's interesting.
It's for like this is, and like, there's also like going into PlayTime. There's also kind of like the anti-globalist bend.
Reed, I mean, I'm sensing that like you kind of like Tati like maybe more than John and I do. Is that an accurate like perception or?
Yeah, I would say part of me doesn't really consider Tati as like a full-time filmmaker. He seems to feel more like an academic essayist more than a filmmaker.
Yeah, there's something kind of like non-filmic about his movies that are kind of interesting.
Yeah.
That is something. There's almost something theatrical about them, especially like the huge, like voyeuristic angles he always gets.
Yeah. I guess like kind of my just closing thought on this movie is that like I think the point where I like kind of realized like this movie like maybe like wasn't quite like in my wheelhouse was that like I kind of like their house. Like I like that modernist house.
I mean, Tati clearly hates it, and he thinks it's just fussy and unnecessary. But you're kind of like, this is kind of magical.
Yeah.
Fussy, unnecessary. What about Hulot's apartment where he has to
I mean, that's the thing about it is that, like, I mean, I kind of agree with Tati. I hate modern architecture. Just look at my fucking apartment. I have antique mirrors and a picture from 1915. But I also think that, like, hey, this house is kind of cool.
Well,
there's nothing wrong with it. It's clean.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you and I have never seen eye to eye on this. Like, I enjoy modernist architecture quite a bit.
Yeah.
But, with this movie, I'm kind of like, I would rather live in that, like, supposed, like, horrific, like, modernist house than wherever Hulot is living.
Yeah, whatever. In French stereotype town.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, like, I think, like, the two we watched, this is my preferred, because, like, there are, like, a lot of interesting things about, like, the family in it, and just how unpersonal and consumerist it can be, and, like, I love the dinner party scenes, and I just think there was just more of a core to this movie than PlayTime. Well, so I think, I do prefer it as, like, a cinematic experience, even though I think the ending is absolutely pointless. Not unlike PlayTime, it's a movie without a resolution. But regardless, so I think I kind of want to get. I know I can't quite do like my final thoughts about talking about Tati in general.
Well, let's get into PlayTime because I have quite a bit more to say about this movie. I think.
Yeah, as do I. What did you read?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the last time I watched this, it was around October, somewhere around last October. I talked about it briefly in the "What Have We Been Watching" segment, dozens of episodes ago. But anyways, I did it again. But one of the things I did notice came up again is that some of these scenes go on for way too fucking long.
I mean, like, the restaurant scene in particular is just an exercise in We Get It.
It was over 42 minutes.
We get it.
That's an episode of Grey's Anatomy, right? And Grey's Anatomy is more interesting.
Oh my
okay,
God.
I'm not going to damn it to that ghetto, but I guess, like, strangely, I think one of my biggest issues with this movie is that, like, there's this weird sort of anti-globalism about it, or it's like the opening scene of the movie is in an airport, and there's sort of like everyone's speaking other languages, and there's tourists coming in everywhere, and there's just all like different ethnicities. The languages are kind of confused, like everyone seems to be speaking like English, German, there's like signs in all different languages everywhere. And, like, Tati films it in such a way that there's sort of an anxiety about that. And I find that kind of not quite nefarious, but
so
I find it off-putting.
So John, is what you're saying is that if he were alive today, he would want to make France great again. Is that what you're trying to say?
Potentially.
I didn't quite get that vibe, but I kind of do agree with you that, like, after a certain point, it wasn't so much with this movie as with, like, Mon Oncle, but, like, after a certain point, I was kind of like, maybe Tati is a little too conservative, like, for his own good here.
Yeah, I get what you're saying here, but you're not going to be any alternatives, man. You're not going to be any alternatives, man. I think, like, here's the thing, at least in, like, Mon Oncle, there's kind of, they give you Stereotypeville as an alternative. Here, it's just like, this is France.
Shrug.
That's it. Shrug. Yeah. They just have Hulot chasing after the architect.
Can I say my piece here?
Oh, certainly.
I actually kind of enjoyed this movie quite a bit.
Okay.
And a lot of that is because I went into it, like, prepared for, like, to watch just, like, some kind of a cinematic experiment. And I got that. This movie is unlike any other movie I've ever seen. And I kind of appreciate it, not just for that, but maybe for that above all else. I do think if I had been in a worse mood, like, when I watched this movie, I might have hated it. Like, I think if I had not been in the right mood to see it, I would have just been like, what the fuck is this? Like, what am I watching? Like, can I leave? Like, dear God. This was not my reaction. Like, I started it off, I was kind of like, okay, this is odd. This is weird. Okay, but this is kind of cool. Okay, I mean, the design of this movie's great. The sets are amazing.
This broke the bank several times.
Yeah.
Trying to make this.
Shot in 70 millimeter. Like, what?
70 millimeter, like, meticulous, huge sets.
Yeah. And just the choreography that must have gone into this movie, like, I can't even imagine.
Like, all the cars are, like, right next to each other. Like, everything about it is, like, meticulously staged.
And this is something that I do find a little bit frustrating about him, but I did think it was interesting how he, like, directs your eye more with, like, sound design than with cutting or with, like, editing techniques.
There was kind of, like, there was a sort of, like, early sound era experimentalism to his work, which I find really peculiar.
Which is weird because they were made so far, like, after the advent of sound. I don't know. I will say that restaurant scene was kind of like the wall for me. Like, you talked about the Fassbinder wall last week. Like, this was the Tati wall for me. Like, after about, like, 20 minutes of that restaurant scene, I was kind of like, okay, where is this going?
Yeah, well, I do want to say this because, like, this is sort of a trap I get into. I don't mind that it's an experiment. I just wish it was an experiment that had more to it.
Yeah.
I wish there was, like, if not, like, I don't really need a plot or even really an emotional core. I just need an ideological core to it.
Yeah.
Like, something that says, like, here is the issue. This is my, not so much solution, but what I think we should be moving towards. Like this is why I think Modern Times is a better movie, because it's a movie that has, like, a very specific sort of, like, we need compassion, we need, it brings you a solution to the oppressive modernism that it presents. Yeah. Whereas this, it just shrug, everything falls apart.
Well, one thing I will say about this movie, and maybe one reason I kind of liked it more than Mon Oncle, the thing with Mon Oncle where I was kind of like, okay, like, you're satirizing, like, the modernism. I think it would be better if, like, you turned a more critical eye on, like, the consumerism rather than just, like, the modernism. And this movie kind of does that. Like, my favorite scene in this movie, which I thought was delightful, is that sequence where they're at, like, the weird trade show and, like, they're like, it's a broom with headlights. Like, that's all good.
That's what you use it for.
The silently slamming doors are comedy gold. I loved that. That's fantastic. I also really liked the sequence, like, where he's, like, in the office and just kind of wandering around. I thought that was all really good stuff, like, kind of poking fun at, like, corporate culture. I guess I just like this movie more was because it seemed to have like more specific targets rather than just French society. So
it's also just more meticulously made. Like, the shots and it's just so much. The shots in it just seem so more precise. Like there was like a theatrical preciseness to it that I really admire.
You really, really feel the craftsmanship with this movie, and
I think one of my favorite staging elements is how we are shown the apartments and we get this big wide shot and we're shown that the TV is always the same place in the wall. It's this big communal experience, and we just get this mirrored effect.
Yeah.
Where everyone's doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Which I think is brilliant.
I like all of that.
I think it also has one of my favorite pieces of world building is that they give you a series of travel posters, and it's always the same boring. It's always the same boring 70s block on there, and it just says USA. France, London, etc.
I also love just a subtle little thing with this movie. All the landmarks of Paris are only shown in reflections in the windows.
Yeah.
I think there is something you get this big panoramic of this. Is it a fake panoramic of the city, or is that a real? Because so much of the movie just seems artificial.
I couldn't say. I don't know. I really appreciated the experimentalness and the craftsmanship of this movie a lot. It felt like more of a just a big swing than Mon Oncle did, and I think that factored a lot into my enjoyment of it.
Yeah, my issue the experiment. I think this has some really great experiment. I'm not judging the experimentalism. There was some great silent-esque slapstick in it. There was some great world building in it, and it is kind of an achievement of filmmaking in certain ways. The issue is I just wish it had just a little bit more to say.
Yeah, I'm not going to fight you on that.
I just wish it had a point. I just wish it had more to it, other than les modernismes de la France is mad.
Reed, do you have any? Do you want to tell us why we're wrong, or just wrap things up here?
I'm not the film studies major. I can't tell you if you're wrong, and
you can.
And actually, you're probably right.
Well, so do you like it?
Okay. I like how Tati sort of takes the form of a movie and makes it into something that's like an essay, but more like a video essay, or something you would find in an academic journal or something.
But it's an essay with the conclusion chopped off it. That's my issue with it.
Oftentimes, yeah.
I know. I guess I think this. I texted this to you verbatim. Is that I admire what PlayTime is far more than the actual experience of watching it, because it's this big, meticulously made, giant silent film with sound about criticizing modern architecture and modern society. That should be something right up my goddamn alley.
Yeah.
But it just, I think it just feels kind of half-baked in some places for me.
Yeah, that is true.
Especially that restaurant scene.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I saw that scene, I remembered how much I loathed, sitting down, having to watch that for a class. And I'm oh, sweet God. Move on.
One more fucking fish getting covered in cream sauce, I am going to murder someone.
Yeah.
I will say I do really like the design of it's a restaurant that keeps falling apart.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
As the scene. I do really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a nice subtle thing. If it's nice subtle saying, if it is meant to be a subtle saying at all, maybe.
Well, it's not really subtle at all. It's kind of a huge thing that they display in the film.
Yeah.
But I like it nonetheless.
Although, yeah, and the discount 1960 Sean Hannity figure is, obnoxious and American, which I just said the same thing. So.
Boy, he really did look like Sean Hannity, didn't he?
You're right.
I didn't even think of that.
Don't you talk about my dad going to Europe?
Just in conclusion here, I do kind of wish, like, modern filmmakers would, like... There are techniques that Jacques Tati uses that I wish modern filmmakers would emulate.
Yes. I kind of like just how, like, giant the frame is all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, just packing the frame with visual detail, like, that's all good. I love his sound design. I think all that stuff is great. Just the idea of, like, just a silent film with sound is something I always love.
Yeah. Because, like, I think we just, like, admire, like, film as, like, this visual experience, and just stripping it to its most basic form, the silent picture, is something that's kind of arresting for us.
Yeah. I just wish Tati were, like, a little more skilled at, like, the conventional directorial attributes of, like, getting ideas across and directing where your eye is supposed to go.
My thing is, I guess I just don't want him to make France great again. I think that's where I'm at.
I was going to say, if you lived in the modern era and did propaganda films for Front National, that would be frightening.
I don't think he's quite there, though.
He's not quite on that level.
He doesn't seem like a racist.
Yeah.
He's just kind of like a general anti-globalist and about, like, French culture. He's snooty. We'll put it that way.
That's fairly accurate. He's snooty. Okay, so that's Jacques Tati.
Interesting filmmaker.
Yeah, for sure. I don't feel like my time was wasted with these movies.
No, not.
Okay.
So guys, what's next?
Well, I have some ideas, but if you guys have anything you want to do, by all means.
You shoot away. You want more?
Yeah.
Reed, do you have anything on the docket?
I'm gonna save my last shot for later, so you go ahead.
Okay.
Is this in Yuli?
No.
Okay then.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
What were you thinking?
Well, let's see. Okay, I've got my running list here. If we wanted to stay in France, I would certainly be all right with that. There's a number of French filmmakers I'd still like to check out. Are we ever going to actually get around to doing Tarkovsky, or is that just a pipe dream?
My classes start this week.
I kind of figured that might be an issue.
Yeah, that's just something that I wish. Like, I mean, I'd be willing, like, in the future, do, like, a single episode just dedicated to a single Tarkovsky film.
Okay.
I think that, especially if we watch, like, a bunch of other stuff, like, on the side.
Yeah.
I think that could be really interesting, but just as a full, our Russian episode,
yeah,
that might strain under its own weight.
That's fair enough. I'll get to you someday, Stalker, I promise. Okay.
It's on Canopy.
It is on Canopy. Let's see. Okay, so I've got a list of French filmmakers here. Louis Malle is one I've long been interested in checking out. There's Jean-Pierre Melville, who's another one I've been kind of itching to do. There's that more modern one, Olivier Assayas, who he just put out a movie this year called Personal Shopper, which we wouldn't necessarily have to watch. If any of these sound good to you, pipe up.
I'm looking at Jean-Pierre Melville, and he has a movie in his filmography, Magnet of Doom.
Magnet of Doom. I don't think I've actually heard of that one. Do we want to do some Jean-Pierre Melville?
What were you thinking of doing?
For Melville?
For Melville, yes.
Well, we have to do Les Samurai. That's one that comes up a lot that I've been itching to see. He has this movie, it's a little long, so I don't know if we would want to do this one, but there's a movie he made called Army of Shadows that's about the French Resistance.
Interesting.
Okay.
Interesting.
That has a very 1977 Star Wars looking cover, even though it came out before Star Wars. No. Yeah, before Star Wars. Well, it had a release date of 1978 in the UK and 2006 in the US.
Apparently that was suppressed for a number of years. Let's see.
These look interesting.
He has another crime film called Le Cercle Rouge, the Red Circle. I don't know.
He acted in Breathless.
Oh, he acted in Breathless?
Yeah, apparently.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Let's see. So, Army of Shadows seems really interesting.
Magnet of Doom.
What is Magnet of Doom? I can't even find that.
I just like the title.
It's on his Wikipedia. It was in 1963.
Magnet of Doom.
It was Melville's first feature film shot in color, Magnet of Doom.
Ah. In Paris, the young ex-para and would-be boxer loses his first big fight and is sacked by his manager.
Magnet of Doom.
I mean, I love that title, and it's only 102 minutes, but...
Skip.
Okay.
So Les Samurai and Army of Shadows, I suppose.
Is that what we want to do? I'm down for that if you guys are.
I am down for that as well.
All right. So Jean-Pierre Melville, Les Samurai and Army of Shadows coming your way next week. Army of Shadows is about 2.5 hours long, so hopefully we can muddle through that. I guess we'll find out. We'll see.
Regardless, I will watch it.
All right. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for joining us, as always. See you next time.
Bye.
They can't see you waving.
Reed, why are you wearing a fedora?
It was there.
Okay, no, never mind. Okay. But then now let's look at Melville.
Ooh, he's got a pipe.